Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Thank you so much for being here tonight. I'm going to introduce our speaker. His name is Khalil Nobles. He is a Brooklyn native and founder of Savoir Brooklyn, which was established in 2023. Khalil is a Great Dane. He graduated from the University at Albany.
You wear, you know.
That's it. In 2007, he achieved his bachelor's in information science. And in 2008, he achieved his master's in information science and technology. In 2015, Khalil obtained his law degree from Benjamin Cardozo School of Law, where he focused on intellectual property and information law. Currently, Khalil is a practicing attorney at a top-ranking international law firm where he specializes in artificial intelligence, machine learning, and technology transactions. Khalil is a top-ranking attorney in intellectual property law and considered one of the best lawyers, ones to watch, since 2021 to present. Aside from being a badass attorney, entrepreneur, a member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, and my sans, shout out to Spring 2007 pledge class at SUNY Albany. His biggest accomplishment to date is being a dad to two little humans. So without further ado, Khalil Nobles.
Wow, that intro, that bio, as you were reading it, I'm like, who you talking about? But thank you. I'm super humbled to be here at Lips Cafe. Shout out to Jermaine and Mama Donna for always opening up their space to us to host these things. I'm super excited about the conversation, and to all the folks out there that, stayed to listen, shout out to y'all as well.
Thank you guys. That's it. That's right. We're here at Lips Cafe, 1412 Nostrand Avenue, Brooklyn. So, yes, I am so happy that everybody's here tonight. Before we dive in, Khalil, I wanted to just kind of 2023 was a big year for AI, right? I mean, compared to where we were February 2023 to now, the technology has advanced exponentially, right? So before we kind of dive into the meats and potatoes, can you walk us through some terminology, definitions, like what is AI? What is generative AI? What is machine learning? Can you walk me through those definitions?
Absolutely. So artificial intelligence doesn't have an agreed upon definition, but it's basically getting computers to think like humans. That's the most basic way that you can say it. And there's four basic types. There's reactive, where the algorithm or the computer or the machine reacts to input.
Okay.
There's limited memory, where it learns from inputs and gradually gets better. There's theory of mind, where it can anticipate others' thoughts. And then there's pretty much self-aware, which is what we don't want, but that's the end goal. That's like Terminator 3, Terminator 2. Right now, we're probably in the first two prongs, which are reactive and limited memory. Most of what we think about when we think about AI and we see AI is in those first two buckets. Generative AI is when AI can receive inputs and react to it, or can create something based on that. So that could be a poem, it could be a song, it could be a response to a question, right? It generates some type of output. And lastly, machine learning is when the machine can take inputs. Typically, it's a model. You feed that model a ton of data, and it gradually gets better and better and better. So most of what we're thinking about when we think about AI is some type of machine learning power. And these are these huge algorithms. It takes a ton of data, and where things start to go awry, and I'm sure you're going to touch on this, is when people are getting data from sources that they don't know, and they're just putting into these models. And because they don't know or don't care who owns the data that they're using, it's harder and harder to know who owns the output of the algorithm or the model at the end.
Thank you. And what is copyright infringement? What is that? What is that?
Sure. So a copyright exists when you take an idea and you fix it in a tangible medium. And what that means in layman's terms is if you have a poem and you write it down, then you have a basic copyright in that poem. If you take song lyrics and you write them down, then you have copyrights in those song lyrics. If you record those song lyrics on CD or whatever they're using now, you have copyrights in that recording.
Okay.
If you write a book, you have copyrights in that book. And Congress, a long, long time ago, like 1793, passed the Copyright Act to protect the ability to make copies of something. Like, that's pretty much where it originates. And by filing a copyright registration and putting a copy of your work with the Copyright Office, you have a federal protection for that that idea or that fixed expression, as we call it. And even if you don't file it, you have basic copyright protection. You have common law copyright, but by filing federally, you have stronger. One, you get more money when you sue somebody, and two, it's constructive notice to the world that that is your protected work. And when you infringe it, is when someone copies it without your permission. So that's like with Napster, when people downloaded songs without the permission of the owner, right? When someone, in some ways, takes a song from somebody and like re-records it as their own, or if someone bootlegs a book or a poem or a piece of art that's not in the public domain, meaning it hasn't been released to the public without copyright. Anytime you make a copy of someone's copyrighted work without their permission, you're basically infringing their copyrights. There's certain defenses like fair use, and like a substantiality threshold, where it's like, are you referencing it in enough of a manner to actually trigger copyright infringement? But fair use is typically used as a defense when you're saying, oh, I'm an educator, so I just showed this as a means to teach my students about the work. So fair use doesn't really apply in a commercial sense.
Thank you. And why should I, as an artist, care about AI? How does it impact, say, a visual artist? Like, why should they care about it?
So when you say visual artist, you mean like an actor, or you mean like a poet, or like an actual artist that draws?
That paints or draws, yeah.
Sure. So AI has an impact on pretty much all artists right now. If you look at, and I'll answer your question about artists shortly, but if you look at actors, right? What some studios are now doing is they're getting people to sign a contract that says, like me, right? I'm going to be in the next Best Man, right? So I'm actually on camera manifesting this. I'm going to be in the next Best Man, right? But let's say there's Best Man 5, right? And I'm cast next to Nia Long, right? Again, I'm all just manifesting this. Don't kill me, wife, right? But let's say that I'm cast alongside her.
Okay.
What some studios are doing is that they'll film Best Man 5, and then for Best Man 6, say, you know what, I don't want to pay him, so I'm going to get an AI-created version of him to do all the acting, right? And if I don't have the right paperwork in place, I can't prevent that, right? Now, for a visual artist, if you're not protecting your works, right, like you're not actually getting copyrights over your work, and again, you have a de facto copyright over your work when you create it,
right.
But if you're not actually protecting it at the federal level, what people can do is they can use any number of chat engines to say, I want something that looks like Van Gogh's Starry Night. Get that output, and your work may have been one of the outputs that were used to create that. And if you're not properly policing it, you won't be able to get the remedy or the damages or to sue somebody for the amount of money that you would want to if they take that work and become super successful. So if I take any AI engine and say, create me something that looks like Starry Night, it goes viral on social media or somewhere else, and people whose inputs or their works were used to create that, if they don't have the right protection, or they don't know that they have protection, they may have no way of getting any kind of compensation for something that I may go viral off of. So artists have to be very careful about what they sign in terms of signing away their rights of publicity, their rights of copyrights, derivative works, all of the IP rights that go along with what you create. You want to protect those. You also want to read contracts carefully and make sure that you're not being locked into some type of weird exclusive contract. You want to own your likeness. You want to own your name, your image, and all depictions of that so that you can kind of mitigate the risk that someone tries to basically get over on you.
So, touching on what you said right now, like likeness, right? Like to protect your likeness, is that something that is like when I say local, I mean like a state issue? Like, is that something I can assert within my state, or is that something I can assert like in the United States, or wherever I am, or does it depend, like state to state?
It's a great question. So there is some variance state by state,
Okay.
but in New York State, you have a right to protect basically your likeness and your rights to pub or your rights to any kind of publicity, right?
Okay.
So it's a state tort claim, and your likeness is treated somewhat differently state to state, but the same premise exists where it's just like your name, your likeness, your image is protectable in pretty much every state as far as I'm aware.
Okay, thank you. Should the creative industry feel threatened by AI, or should they welcome it?
So it depends. And I hate to give like the lawyerly it depends answer, but I think if you're a creative that's trying to get their foot in the door, then I would be cautious, right? Like, there's been like a fake Drake song that went out. There's been like fake Kurt Cobain songs, from Nirvana, and the record labels are coming immediately to get that stuff taken down, right? So in some cases, before you can monetize it, it's being taken down. So where I say exercise caution is two things. Read any contract for any data that you're getting or using, or if you're generating any kind of output from AI, make sure you understand what's in the contract. The terms of service. Just make sure that if you're generating something on AI and the terms of service says, hey, if you use this, you're asked out if you get sued, then you want to be mindful of that, right? Like, you shouldn't use AI to generate your term paper or your thesis.
Right.
Anything that you want to protect and anything that's like really valuable, I wouldn't use AI to create that,
Right.
right? But where the opportunities are, I think, is in licensing, right? If you want to get creative and license your likeness or license aspects of your name or your copyright or anything else to one of the larger AI players, that may be a big bag for you, and that may be like a substantial opportunity to monetize your IP basically.
So something like the artist Grimes did, right? Because she has her own, right? And then she also has like AI Grimes that she's like created basically, and she's even sharing in royalties with people who want to use or do some sampling of her voice. I mean, is that something that you think people could kind of seek as an opportunity to protect themselves?
Absolutely. So, not sure who Grimes is, but that's the basic premise, right? Like, license your stuff out, because if you wanted to hold on to your IP, right, and just say, you know what, no one can use it, and you're making $5,000 a year on it because no one is using it, that's different than if you're making $5,000 a day licensing it and you still have ownership of it, right? So I agree with that. I think the opportunities in licensing are huge. And if you take advantage of those, then you can still own your IP and still make some money off of it too. And it's passive, right? Like, once you sign that contract, you're off to the races.
So I want to kind of back up a little bit on something you touched, like Heart on My Sleeve, right? The fake Drake or fake Weekend song that I know was pretty big and circulated everywhere. Is that song considered copyright infringement or not? Or is it considered some other type of infringement?
Yeah, that's a good question. So if Drake did not authorize the use of his voice, depending on how his contract is structured with the label, then there's an infringement. Because one, at a minimum, his voice being recorded without his permission is definitely going to touch on copyright. And then if you pull away from copyright, there's also probably some trespass to chattels if they're going on the system and like stealing sounds and that kind of stuff. If they are breaching contracts by scraping his voice off of like YouTube or going on like a record label's website and scraping data or copying his voice without his permission, it's touching privacy and potentially contract as well. So copyright is probably like the first layer, but when you peel it back, there's like several claims that can pop out of somebody making songs without an artist's permission or without the label's permission.
Okay. And what about in the world of like OpenAI, DALL.E 2, right? Is that like, is that considered any sort of type of infringement or no? Or it's like, that's proper. And if it is proper, why is that proper to use that type of platform?
Yeah, so for those that don't know, there's like DALL.E 2, there's DALL.E 3, there's Volley. There's these different AI engines that can create pictures or visual works or written works based on your inputs. And all of those have the same issue, right? You just don't know what inputs were used to power those engines. And there's no way of really knowing whether or not downstream you have full copyright to that output. And in fact, the Copyright Office has already said right now you cannot get a copyright over the output of a generative AI engine. For that same reason, there's too much uncertainty. Like they don't know where it comes from, and they would rather be cautious than inadvertently trip over somebody else's copyrights that's actually fully registered with the office. I would just, caution people against relying on any of that stuff to generate something that they want to monetize or something that is like really valuable to them.
So Khalil, in terms of like a creative trying to protect their likeness, right? Is there anything that they can do to prevent it from being fed into the training data of generative AI? And if so, what is that? Like, what can they do?
Yeah, great question. Unfortunately, no, right? There's not much you can really do. And in terms of training, when we're talking about that, that's the machine learning. That's the reactive, limited memory type of AI that gets inputs, reacts to it, and gets better the more you feed it. So again, what we're talking about is for these AI engines to get better, they're fed a lot of data, like tons and tons of data over and over again, and people are pulling data from who knows where in order to improve these large models. And unfortunately, they're grabbing stuff from everywhere, and there's no real way of knowing who, what, when, and how. So there's not really a way to prevent someone from taking your IP and putting it into a model. But the best thing to do is make sure that you register your IP federally, whether it be a copyright, a trademark, or otherwise, so that as these engines get better and they start to do copyright and trademark and other IP checks, they can flag that your IP is in there and hopefully take it out. And also with respect to any kind of infringement, you can always sue once you figure out that somebody is infringing. You can always say you can sue people for that as well.
Okay. So what I'm getting is the number one thing I got to do as a creative is I got to file for trademark or patent or copyright, whatever type of work it is that I'm putting out in the world, right?
Absolutely. And copyrights particularly are pretty inexpensive. Patents are super expensive, but copyrights and trademarks are not that expensive. Like copyrights are like cheap. Super easy to do, like very straightforward. Trademarks and patents, you typically need like an IP lawyer to do that stuff for you. But copyright is very straightforward. And for me, I think it has a lot of utility and a great reward because if you're a poet or an artist or a singer, filing that stuff with the Copyright Office doesn't cost that much. And again, if someone is infringing, you're going to get a big bag, if your suit is successful, and it usually is.
I know at the end of October, I know POTUS, the president, came down with an executive order, right, related to AI. Can you tell us in English what is that executive order and why I should care about it?
Yeah, so it was about 67 pages, and I had the, I guess you can say, the pleasure of reading it. But basically,
Some light reading?
Yeah, right. Basically, what it amounts to is that the federal government is taking steps now to both encourage the development of AI, but also the security of citizens vis-a-vis AI. And what that means in plain English is that he's ordered several branches of the government, so the Department of Homeland Security, Department of Defense, the FTC, to promulgate rules and regulations governing how AI is used. They're encouraging the use of AI in government. They're trying to find ways to regulate it. And what the executive order was pretty much saying is now's the time to try to get ahead of this stuff. But it's an executive order, so it's not actually binding on anyone. It's still up to the agencies to actually, follow through with some type of regulation.
Okay.
And it's also the Congress to actually pass like an official law. So it's not binding, but it's a signal that that administration is thinking very carefully about AI, about how to protect it, how to make it very useful federally within federal agencies, and how to find ways to protect the average consumer from any kind of predatory uses of AI, right? So that's everything from, revamped privacy policies, standard terms and conditions around how to agree to the use of AI. So it's a full gambit of different protections. We'll see how it plays out in the next year because it's up to Congress to really follow through on top of the FTC. And the FTC has been pretty clear in saying that they will go after any company that they feel like is doing anything unfair or deceptive as it relates to the use of AI. And, for those that don't know, the FTC is the Federal Trade Commission. So they're the ones that go after people for deceptive privacy policies. If someone is doing weird stuff with someone's data online, it's the FTC that goes after them. So if a random company is taking your data and they're saying if you press this button right here, you can be erased from their system, but you're not really erased from their system, that's deceptive. And the FTC will come after you. So they play a very important role in the AI space as well because they've been one of the first agencies to go after people for any kind of conduct they think is nefarious as it relates to the use of AI and their customers' data, which ties right into AI as well.
Okay. And where do you, 2023, like I said, was a big year. Where do you think we will be in 2024? Like, what are some, from a legal perspective, how can an artist like move forward in 2024 with, whether it's protecting their work or like I, mentioned reviewing contracts. Like, what are some, like, what do you think is the future for us in 2024?
Well, I hope it's not Terminator 2, Terminator 3, and it's not different machines walking around like iRobot. I hope that's not what happens. But in terms of the average Joe and the average Jane, I think just embrace it. Learn what you can, right? At a basic level, just understand what it is. It's computers trying to think like humans, but they're not at the point where they can actually think like humans, right? Like, as far as I know right now, there's no AI engine that's available that has human level interaction or human level thinking. And as far as I know, I joke about it, but I'm saying as far as I know because all I know is all I know. But as far as I know, that's decades away, right?
Okay.
So hopefully not in our lifetimes and in our kids' lifetimes or their kids' lifetimes. But in terms of just protecting yourself, I think it's just doing like a common sense gut check in terms of if I was an artist and somebody said, hey, sign this, right? If I don't understand what's in it or I see words like perpetual or exclusive, bring it to a lawyer, right? Or if I'm an actor and someone says, hey, sign this if you want to be in Best Man 5, and they're not trying to let me show it to a lawyer, then, that should, raise some red flags. But AI won't necessarily change the landscape of how you protect your IP. I think it'll probably make people have to be more proactive in doing so, right? Like all the steps that you would take before as a songwriter or as an actor, those probably still exist, but now you just have to be more proactive in thinking through how your AI is used. And if you have something that's widely available or goes viral, you definitely want to take the steps to get that stuff registered to avoid, people sweeping that up and, making an AI version of you or like an AI version of your song that you didn't clear you didn't license
Right.
and, aren't getting any money from.
Thank you, Khalil. So, Khalil, thank you so much
My pleasure.
for being here tonight.
Shout out to this audience too. You guys were great. I'm gonna clap up for y'all too. You guys were great.
Thank you so much for being here tonight. Thank you, Lips Cafe, for hosting us, for allowing us to use your space. Thank you. I hope tonight was informative for you all. This is part of my Cali Knowledge Bar series. This is episode 3. And I will continue to collaborate in other areas of law that I think are applicable in your everyday life. As I've said before, and I'll say it again, knowledge is power. And so I hope to educate you all so you can make informed decisions in your everyday life.
I also just want to plug Savoir Brooklyn.
Yes!
It's the People's Podcast. It's Brooklyn's podcast. Savoir means to know in French, so this is to know Brooklyn from my perspective. I interview a bunch of Black and brown entrepreneurs in Brooklyn. I've been at Lips Cafe, done a bunch of interviews, right here in the same seat. This podcast was launched right here in the same seat. These tumblers are on sale right over there. If you want one, follow me on the gram. Check me out on YouTube. And shout out to all y'all for being here on a Sunday, because you could have been anywhere else, but you're here with us. Appreciate it.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much.